Hi, everyone. I am filling in for Martin, who is on the road. And what can I say? It is so great to be back. I'm very excited about this guest because I know nothing about him. Rob Zweitek. Let's see, I'm just going to hit a couple of the highlights here. He is a UFO researcher with the Coalition and the board of the National UFO Historical Record Center. He has been working with MUFON since, looks like 1976. He also, in his past, has had great experience in all different sciences. In fact, he had a double major of earth science and physics. I'm just going to bring him on because I can't wait. I love opening new packages. And sorry, Rob, your new package. And he's taken a while to come down the chimney here with the new package. Hello, Rob.
Martin. Dean, sorry about that. Great to see you and good to be on the show tonight.
Glad to have you here. How are you, first of all?
Fairly well. Thank you very much. I hope you're doing well.
I am. I want to dive in and get into how you got into this and where you're going. But first, I want to kind of get your opinion. There have been two videos that were dropped recently. One was the Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp still, which is from, I guess, 1 second of footage, which in the total footage is 4 seconds, but the actual footage of this spherical metallic ball is 1 second. I don't know if you got a chance to look at that. And then Dave Beatty also had some footage that he showed that looks like FLIR footage. Want to get your take on that?
Yeah, I haven't seen any in the last day or so, so busy with a couple things here. Yeah,
well, I can tell you, I took a look at it. It's interesting. I'm kind of waiting for some of the pundits to take a look at this. Anytime I get new information, the first thing I do is I go into, and I don't know if you do this as well, I'm assuming you do, you go into analyst mode. I'm not a skeptic or a debunker, but I do like to analyze and take a look. And, anytime someone serves up something, it's kind of, exciting to dive in, but I want to make sure that, that it feels credible on all the boxes.
That's absolutely what I do. I probably look through hundreds of videos and still shots that occur in the MUFON's case management system each year. I'm always trying to find some good cases to speak about or to refer someone to, and so yeah, I see my fair share, maybe more than my fair share of videos, most of which aren't all that great, but there's some that are rather amazing.
The diamond in the rough. So let's back up and kind of start where it all started. What was the impetus? What was that rosebud moment for you where you went, oh, this is something?
Yeah, the impetus. Basically, it was the fact that UFOs were fairly big news items. And the University of Colorado study was going on, and sightings were appearing in the local newspapers, and books were coming out. And somehow in school or whatever, I either saw a reference to a book that had just been published on UFOs, and I read some of these sightings in the newspapers, and I was just hooked. I recall seeing, believe it or not, one of the very first books I read was George Adamski's Flying Saucers Have Landed. And okay. I've since learned that a lot of prominent UFO researchers in the field had that as their first book. But once I got past that, and I realized that the true UFO phenomenon is just amazingly intriguing. And I never left off my interest in the field from that time until this time today. I'm still as intrigued as I was 50 plus years ago.
So was that the first exposure you had, was Adamski's book, or was it something that you saw on TV? What was your kind of thoughts on life elsewhere?
Well, going really back far, before I really was into reading UFO books per se, I do recall reading the Kecksburg incident in our local paper in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And that was 65, I think, something like that. And yeah. So that might have been my first exposure to a UFO report. And I might have said to my folks or something, what are UFOs? What's going on here with this? And then over the subsequent years, I would encounter a few other cases. But it finally came down to one day in 1968 where I was just walking through a field and I thought, gee, what I need to do right now is read a UFO book. I just want to read a book on this and start. I just felt intensely curious to want to just dive into the subject. And that's what I did then in the summer of '68 is when I started really focusing my energies more on the true UFO phenomenon and the UFO problem, whatever it might be.
Interesting you say problem. Yeah, it's kind of a challenge for those who are trying to find something that you can hold up as tangible. It's funny, I'm working on this script right now, and I'm trying to deal with exactly that. And so there's a line in it which is, anything that you can repeat in like a lab setting, you can quantifiably say, yes, this is evidence of this. But you can't do that. And you can't repeat the Northern Lights. You can't say, oh, hold on, I will make it come up, in 2 weeks from now. It just is its own, thing, a life of its own.
Yeah, correct. And I'm getting a little tired of hearing about how, and I know UFOs are in just the way you described, non-repeatable, but like the Northern Lights, they are repeatable in the sense that we know we're going to get hundreds of UFO reports each year, thousands actually. MUFON gets thousands, and of those thousands, hundreds remain unexplained or unknowns. So those are always repeating year after year. And what repeats also is their behavior, shapes sometimes, and their characteristics, and other subtle events and effects. That keeps repeating year after year. But you're right, we can't summon it up on a laboratory bench, anything like that at this moment. We don't know when the next sighting is going to occur. It could be right over your place right now, or it could be over who knows what, any place in the US or Canada or the world, seemingly. Yeah. We don't know.
And that's the other thing, is that people like to say it only happens in America, or it only happens out in the country. And the evidence, if anyone were to take a look at some evidence, there's a heck of a lot of it that shows that this has, been around for a very long time in all different areas. If you just look at the Brooklyn Bridge, Linda story alone.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But so you're interested, you have an interest in this. When do you start taking it kind of serious? Because first you went into the academic path, and you're doing a double major here, which is pretty intense.
Could you repeat that, Dean? You just dropped off there a little bit.
Sure. So you go off to college and you're still holding this, and your double major kind of reflects that.
Mm-hmm.
The subject matters that you're studying, Earth studies and astro or physics. So how does that incorporate? What do you, when you're going to college there, how are you feeling like you're going to incorporate this into your interest?
In the field? I can't say as I had any such highfalutin thoughts like that. I really didn't know how I would incorporate my interest into UFOs into any kind of an activity at that time and point. Yeah, when you're going to college, at least my experience was that, geez, I got to get through these classes, and I was reading stuff on the UFOs when I could, but okay, I have to get through the classes. Then after I get through college, I have to find work. I have to find something to do. And UFOs didn't pay money. It wasn't something that you could choose as a vocation to immediately start off and get a full-time job in ufology. I knew that wasn't going to happen. So after I graduated, my interest in UFOs for a number of years thereafter still remained that of looking through magazines and doing a lot of reading. And little by little, I started to creep a little bit closer to the field. I met Stan Friedman. He spoke at our college one day in October, in the fall, I guess it was. And I got some of my professors kind of interested in that, and they went to see Stan Friedman, and they were very impressed. And I crept into the field and joined MUFON in the 70s. But I have to admit, it wasn't until I was really rather established in my job at the patent office, the United States Patent Office here in Virginia, that I made the step to really reach out to a group. And that was the Fund for UFO Research, which was headquartered in the Washington, D.C. area. And I knew all the principals by name in that group, but I had never met any of them. So I knew Richard Hall, and I'd heard of Don Berliner and Bruce Maccabee and all those kind of people, but that's the group I fell in with. And so that's just how it was. And
Oh, you froze there for a
that they
second.
had in looking at cases, and I still adhere to a lot of what they said, and looked at the subject the way they looked at it.
So was this before or after NASA when you worked with NASA?
Yeah, NASA was 1974. So my actual integration into the Fund for UFO Research would have been 1986.
Okay. So you're working in the patent office, and that's before your work at NASA, correct?
That was after. Yeah.
After. Okay. So then let's back up and hit the NASA note. So how did NASA come about working there, and what were you doing?
That was mostly a summer job, unfortunately, and it lasted for a number of months. But curiously enough, I don't know how these things happen, but I ended up on a project at NASA headquarters called the Seasat project, headed by a guy named McCandless. And so I was involved with that, and helping write up technical documents and edit things and doing whatever they said to do. And I wish that had lasted, and I could have gotten a NASA, but it just didn't work out. And maybe I wasn't aggressive enough. But anyhow, I ended up at the patent office a few years. I think it was 3 years after my NASA stint. I was working at the patent office.
I would have gotten kicked out of NASA. I wouldn't have lasted as long as you, because I'm that UFO geek who would be grilling everyone. I'd go to the janitor. You see anything kind of out of the ordinary? Anything going on here?
Well, that's a good thing. That's to be applauded. And one time when I was at NASA, it was the summertime, and I was walking out of the building, and I stopped into they had a little bookshop at that time in the headquarters, and a woman was working behind the desk, and she was on the phone. And I had a question or something like that for her. I can't recall right now what it was, but she hung up at the phone and said, "Gee, I just got a UFO report."
Oh, no way.
Said, what happened? What was it? What do they say? And she said a few things, and this was now 40 some years ago. But she said, we don't have anywhere to transfer those things. And she didn't hang up on the guy, but she was polite and courteous to him, and ultimately hung up. And that's the way UFO reports were treated when they came into at least the gift shop there.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Wow, we've come kind of a long way from the gift shop at NASA to the UAP task force.
Yes,
some may argue the other way, but
yes, in some ways we have, and in some ways we haven't.
Yeah, exactly. So you're working at NASA. Now, how do we go from NASA to the patent office, which, as you know, the patent office is ripe with conspiracy theories. And so did you go into that with any idea or any exploration, need to explore, desire to, or was it just, hey, I've got a connection at that office?
Yeah, it was the kind of thing where my folks said, you're going to have to get a job. And I had applied for government positions, and then suddenly I was offered one, even without an interview. So beggars can't be choosers, let's put it that way. So I packed up my bags and moved from Northeast Pennsylvania down to Virginia, and began working at the patent office, and whatever was going to happen to me was going to happen. And I ended up working in a lot of different technical areas in the patent office, which were some of which were quite interesting. And eventually, for the last 16 years or so, that would have been the place I wanted to be in right from the beginning. So it sort of worked out okay.
What excited you about it? What got your interest in that?
It was aviation, and you'd be working on satellite stuff, launch technology sometime, aviation technology, ailerons, all parts of airplanes.
Triangular, anti-gravitational technology, just something like that.
I would get those kind of applications, but every patent has to be, I don't want to get into a big description here of how complicated the patent application process is. But basically, patent applications have to describe whatever the invention is in sufficient detail that a person who is skilled in the area to which the invention could make or use the invention just by reading what the inventor had to say about it. So if you invent an improvement to a landing gear, to an engineer, an aeronautical engineer, it ought to be pretty clear to that person, oh yeah, okay, I see exactly how this person's building this landing gear based on his specification. I see exactly what he claims to say is his invention, and I understand it. But if someone submits an application that talks about recognized by in at least normal physics today, and we just don't have anti-gravity devices. Obviously, we plug into our airplanes to make them fly. It's you just can't even really work on the application. You give them a certain type of a technical rejection that says it doesn't adhere to science as we understand it, and that's that. That's how you deal with them.
Right.
And that's how I dealt with them. And I even, was in the classified area. And I can tell you that the same principles applied there. Even classified projects still have to adhere to physics and engineering as it's currently understood in the world today. You can't just say, oh, I put an anti-gravity device into the bottom of this satellite and then it just can take off by itself from the surface of the Earth. Sorry, that's not going to fly patent-wise.
So if I were to donate to your Patreon account, you could tell me what some of this classified information was, some of these patents.
Well, it's, yeah.
I'll take that as a no.
Interesting. Let's just say I wish I had okay. Let me put it this way. Here's an interesting way of putting it, and this is 100% true. I did get across on a number of times, probably 10 or fewer times in the course of my patent examining career, disc-shaped aircraft or saucer-shaped aircraft. And none of them, they were all unclassified. And I looked at those things and people would put, they'd have a saucer-shaped craft and they'd put some kind of a lifting engine in it, a rotating fan might be a good thing. And they might have a series of those around the circumference of the saucer. Then they'd have something that gave a horizontal impetus to the thing. So once the fans lifted it off the ground, it had something at right angles to the surface of the Earth to push the along so they could fly where they wanted to go. But each and every one of them I worked at adhered to conventional aeronautical and engineering technology. They might have been improvements on it, and I ended up giving these people patents, but there wasn't anything mysterious about how these things worked. So they're all public documents. They're all public documents. You can read them.
And none of them was Bob Lazar, I'm guessing.
None of them was Bob Lazar.
I want to dive into, hold on, we've got a question here from Steve Long. Robert, can you elaborate on how the PA patents, patents were able to be approved, how they were without such clear standards? That's a good question. I was trying to figure out the name of that.
Yeah,
I wanted to mention that.
Familiar. Yeah, that's a really good question. And the examiner of the pious application, the one that this individual is probably reporting to, if I had like 15 seconds or 20 seconds, I could pull that from the papers behind me and show it to you. But anyhow, I don't think that, well, I hate to badmouth or say anything really poor about how something, what the patent office issues, but I'm not 100% sure that pious device, which describes a device that's capable of moving at tremendous speeds in the water or in the air or in space where there's no air, at speeds far beyond what we have achieved as human beings on this planet. And it's a very short patent, and it's got, at the end of every patent, they have what they call the claims, and the claims describe, they claim what the inventor believes to be his or her invention. The claims are very, very short. But like I said earlier, the application, including this pious application, should tell that if you're an engineer, you could make and design and use this invention. And I don't see anybody flying around on the pious device. And I don't think it would, I just don't think we have the technology to be able to replicate that device. And to be honest with you, to be frank, I'm a little unclear how that got a patent, but it did. And it was sponsored by the Navy, and Pius worked for the Navy. And if the Navy had thought this invention could be reduced to practice, I guarantee you this would have had a secrecy order imposed on it. It would never have been let out publicly, because enemies of the United States, enemies of the free world, whatever, could make this thing and dominate the skies, but they aren't.
Yeah, that could be a whole show. For those of you who don't know about this, it was a device or vehicle or the promise thereof that this thing would be able to fly with new technology that so far we don't really have. And I always thought, well, if the government was going to do this and they absolutely had to have it patent in order to control it, that you would do it in bits and pieces. And then when you put it all together, you would then have all those pieces covered and no one could do that, even though they wouldn't, have the whole structure of it. It could just be like assembled with all these various patents, correct?
Well, each patent's got interview today. He would say, I presented a complete working device. That's my device. And I set it forth in engineering language and in the technical terminology that's required. And that's what it is. And that's how it works. But I assure you, if you read the thing, it's not all that clear how it works. And I don't want to keep going on and take up the rest of your hour on this, but I have looked into what papers publicly are available on this pious patent. The whole file is available for public consumption on the internet and through the patent office. And you can see how this application wended its way through the patent office. And I have my own opinions on what happened to cause this to become a patent, but there's nothing mysterious about it. It's just the way the patent system works. And the fellow got a patent, and I know for a fact the examiner couldn't find this invention in all the prior patents. He looked through them all. I know the examiner of this patent. I helped train him when he came into the patent office. And
oh, wow.
A guy named Phil, I think his name is Phil Bonzel. And he's a very good examiner. He's a very good engineer and scientist. And he couldn't find it. And long story short, if I can't find it in the patent literature or prove that someone else is, basically that's what happened.
Oh, you froze up, but I think basically what you're saying is if I can't find it in our records, then it's not going to fly by you. No pun intended.
Assuming it's understandable, and they write it properly and everything like that. But yeah, then we let it go. Yeah. If it's trivial or if it's complicated and very important, they get a patent.
Okay. So now you're working within that. And then on the side, you're getting dialed in with MUFON, correct?
Well, actually, with the Fund for UFO Research first, that went on for about 15 years before I really, or even 18 years before I really got on the MUFON's board. But the Fund for UFO Research, I mentioned it's based here in Washington. We interacted with all the other groups. So we would be at meetings with Walt Andrus and John Schuessler, and we would encounter other independent researchers and have chances to meet with them. And so we were pretty well connected as an organization. And we would, the fund was set up to be a non-membership organization, and we would use that money and funnel it back into scientific research. And I swear that we probably raised and gave back into the field well over $1 million, raised from donations and people buying our publications, that sort of thing. So,
wow,
it was fascinating. I must say they had a good idea, Dick Hall and Bruce Maccabee and others when they set up the fund.
It's interesting because people have that idea that, oh, you can make money in UFOs and alien research, and it's just like any other research. And it's like, well, yes, in a way, if you're doing research and you need to show that I'm going to go out and I'm going to study this certain type of, say, wildlife, you can get grants, etc. But for UFOs, it's, and alien, it's very difficult. It's not a job that you can get. It's a job that you have to get funded. And so, unless you're writing books, you can maybe, do well, but most of the people who are writing books, that's not their main, sustenance. It's other things in conjunction with. It's passion that drives it.
Yeah, you're 100% right, Dean. There have been some people who, for a little while, the Fund for UFO Research paid a researcher a full-time salary because we got a large grant, a couple $100,000, and we were able to pay this fellow back around the turn of this century
Oh, you froze up there.
with abductees.
Sorry, I'm just going to back you up. You froze up. Say again, Rob.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah, we got a grant from a large benefactor around the turn of the century, and basically we got the grant because we were going to build an instrument package, and we ended up building 13 or 14 instrument packages that were then placed in the putative bedrooms and homes of abductees, with the hope that they might capture something during an abduction account. And so we had enough money to pay someone to constantly monitor these boxes each and every day.
But this is funds that you had to go out and raise. It wasn't something that automatically, I mean, you had a donor who came in.
Absolutely, yeah.
They're hard to come by.
Right, very hard to come by. We never got any government grants, of course. And ufology still doesn't really get, civilian ufology doesn't get any government grants. It would be nice if the National Science Foundation were to give several millions of dollars to UFO research, but so far it hasn't happened.
So, so you're doing this research where you have different sensors, I'm guessing, in people's abductees or experiencers, as we call them now, their home. Did that generate anything? Was it promising?
Well, it was promising. It has a sad ending, and we've all heard that like way too many times. We got this funding to put the boxes out there, and each box was in a house for anywhere from 3 to 6 months. And it was an elaborate scheme we had for how the person was supposed to log in every day. They had to write a journal and talk about their memories of the night before. It might just be, I had no memories. Or if they had what they thought was an abduction experience, we asked them to write it down. We tried to keep things in the blind from the full-time fellow who was working full-time on the project, so he wouldn't really know who the people were. And we got all this data, and then the funding didn't come through to have the very voluminous digital files of this stuff analyzed to see whether or not experiences occurred on the nights when people might have said they thought they remembered being abducted in their journal. And to this very day, that's still that we're still trying to come up with and analyze this data, and little by little it is getting analyzed. And I don't know if there's any black and white signatures so far that have been found. My guess is no, but there were some interesting correlations.
Yeah, I went to a Cero support group meeting, and there was a major in the Army who asked me if I could come and plant cameras. He figured I'm a filmmaker. I could get in there, and he says, "Don't tell me yes or no, with regards to when you're going to do this, because if I know, I'm pretty sure they're going to know." And ultimately, it seemed like it was, when you do something like this, is interesting. It is, you have to kind of tread lightly. You don't want to be doing a fool's errand, because I think whatever it is that is running things knows what's going on much better than we do. But when I think about the way that most of the footage has been captured, it's been almost accidental to a degree. Like I keep waiting for Amazon's The Ring, those cameras when they drop off the boxes and stuff, that you can see that they're going to capture something, but they don't seem to come through the front door. That's the only problem.
Yeah. They may come through the front wall, but you're 100%
maybe
right.
The front wall,
they don't come through the front door
or front window, for that matter. So
yeah, or the front window, right, or the ceiling sometimes. So there you go.
Yeah, interesting. So you're doing that experiment, working with that group, and then talking about how MUFON kind of like a graduate program? How was it looked upon at that time?
Well, MUFON was looked upon as equal. It would be like being traded from or going from the Toronto Blue Jays or something like that in baseball. Maybe the teams are basically at the major league level, and that's how MUFON always was. John Schuessler asked me to be on the board in around 2004, 2005, and the fund was starting to wind down because several of the principals were getting fairly old and weren't as active as before. And the internet put a whole new spin on things. It was not as easy to make publications and sell them. People wanted to read stuff online as they still do. And they found a lot of ways to satisfy their UFO urge. They didn't have to keep buying our publications. Now, when the fund had a scientific work that was done, one of the prerequisites actually was that the researcher had to publish his results or her results in a paper or a monograph, or however long it took to set forth the results in a publication that we could sell. So we had that's how we would get these publications, more or less, and they would all result from work that we had undertaken. But that sort of dried up around the turn of the century, and John Schuster asked me to be on the board of MUFON, and Walt Andrus had left a few years earlier, and so I said yes, and I've been on the board since that time, through several international directors.
So I'm kind of, I know that anything can be a challenge when you're working in any type of organization. Whether it's Google right now, where a whole bunch of people got let go, or it's MUFON. What were some of the challenges? You're still with MUFON?
Yeah, it's a different. I made the analogy before between going from one baseball team to another, but in this case, MUFON does not operate in the same way as the fund did. MUFON, as we all know, is a membership organization, so it always has challenges of coming up with money, of course, from subscriptions in this case to the MUFON Journal, and from donations and from the sale of products. But we're always faced with getting investigators and keeping them on board and training them and having them look into cases. We're always engaged with trying to just engage and collect as many UFO reports and events as we can. And so we've succeeded there. We get 4,000 or 5,000 a year easily. And they're all investigated by a large group of investigators throughout Canada, throughout the US, and other countries. And so, there's a lot of challenges posed there to the people who actually run the organization on a day-to-day basis.
So when you're doing this, what field in particular are you studying? And is it like, it's kind of like, oh, Rob, we go to for technology, doing certain things? Or is it areas that you start out in one and then you kind of progress? What's your sweet spot? What's your pocket?
Yeah, well, I'm on the board, and it's really as a business board. So here we deal more with the financial things, and MUFON doesn't do research per se. In an investigatory way, they do, but they're not giving grants to people to do scientific research like the fund was. So no one's actually coming to me to say, oh, what do you think we should do with this aspect of the subject? That just doesn't happen. We have a meeting coming up tomorrow, to be honest with you, a board meeting. We'll all be together. But we're trying to just run the organization financially. And we have some people on the organization whose purpose it is to basically just see that the field investigators are doing their jobs as are set forth in our field investigators manual. So those are the people that are sort of have their literally boots on the ground in a lot of cases.
What is the not to get too controversial, and I want to move into some of the cases that you have kind of pinned. There since 2017 December, when the first stories came out, it's brought in a huge influx of people, young people interested in this field and are studying this and doing research. Everyone will tell you there's kind of a big step going from, doing the research that you can do now online, that when we were young, it was, you go to the bookstore and there's a special section that you go. Some bookstores still have that section. And you would find those few books, and it was always, put together with Bermuda Triangle and other things. And then you go from that to people who are, again, boots on the ground, research, going up, knocking on doors. People have reported and doing that. So it's interesting, that both are trying to get, to the answers, but one is kind of more like an armchair expert, which I've been for many a year. And then the actual people who are working on specific areas. like yourself. So the question in there is, what do you see the differences? Have you seen people coming in? What is the difference empirically, the evidence and stuff that you're working on, that the organization like MUFON and the new one that you're in versus someone who's, doing their own, research, so to speak?
Well, the person who's doing their own research, at least at this point, doesn't have access to as a huge database of cases. And all the UFO organizations, all the UFO organizations, the Center for UFO Studies, headquartered in Chicago, and MUFON, for example, both have tremendous case files of UFO cases. And for various reasons. So an independent researcher who is just decides they want to start really looking into the subject today is going to have a hard time finding out, well, what cases are occurring right now? Where were UFOs seen last week? Or what types of UFOs were seen? Unless they're lucky enough to read an account in a newspaper, or ultimately someone publishes an article in a magazine or something. You're not going to have access to these tremendous files.
Or if you're young, you see it on TikTok. And so if it's not on TikTok, or
yeah, you can go to the National UFO Reporting Center in Seattle, and all their cases are made public every month. I guess Peter Davenport, the director, uploads the cases, but there's not big descriptions there, and he doesn't investigate cases, so you can't sift between IFOs and UFOs. So, but even with access to the case files, we need more actual research to find out what similarities are there between the unknowns. What odd quirks might they show that might help us understand how they work, or what their modus operandi is, or what their intentions are, this type thing. That's the kind of work that has not been done. In my personal opinion, I don't think we've moved very far down the road as to knowing who's behind or what is behind the UFO phenomenon and why they are here. I think to an open-minded individual, we can show that there's a real phenomenon there that's not of human origin, and it seems to be
we froze up there.
Yeah,
not of human origin.
I don't know why that keeps happening.
That's all right. You cut out on not of human origin, or
but they have an intelligent origin. I don't believe they're humans. I don't, in my opinion, this is me speaking. I can't scientifically prove it, obviously, but there is whatever's behind UFOs is not residing here on the Earth. Let's put it that way.
So,
do
you carve out any niche for the extraterrestrial hypothesis, Dr. Michael Masters, that they're from the future?
Right. Well,
or could be.
I have a problem with the future scenario.
We all have a problem with the future.
Yeah,
it's not looking too good.
Maybe I don't want to be there after I see where things are heading. But it's sort of like solving one mystery with another, and I see too many paradoxes there, time paradoxes that sort of make no sense. And people say, "Oh, the aliens, they're humans. Way down the line, we're going to evolve into that." Well, evolution doesn't seem to be drawing humans toward the common perception of what aliens look like and how they act. They don't act like they're our ancestors. They don't seem to know what's going on here on Earth, according to some abductees. So they're out there. Whatever's behind UFOs is somewhere out there, but I prefer not to solve.
Oh, breaking up again. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. We have another question, Steve Long again here. Why was none of the data or results from the ambient research project ever released as planned?
Well, the research wasn't released because we haven't gone through it. We haven't sifted through that information yet and collated it and looked at it with experts. And this has been an ongoing thread now for many years on a number of blog sites, that we're holding on to this information and we're not letting it out. But our intention was at the time to get enough money, and we needed another $25,000 or $30,000 to complete the statistical investigation of the electronic files to see whether or not like I mentioned before, we had correlations that ran out, and then people left, and we just didn't have the wherewithal then to go through that rather huge pile of electronic data. So I know for a fact that Mark Roediger at the Center for UFO Studies and myself and some of the original principal in the field who was being paid full time, we are still engaging with people, statisticians, independent statisticians. In this case, there's one guy actually, and who is not connected with UFO groups, who is looking through the data, the electronic data, and the notebooks kept by the researchers, and we're going to find out if there's any wheat there among the chaff.
Yeah, that is really exciting for me whenever I hear people that don't normally work in the field who take their special skill set and say, hey, I'm open to applying it here. I feel like that doesn't happen without, what had happened with the Navy Tic Tac stuff. Certainly, Avi Loeb was it kind of cleared the way for his take on it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that groups like UAPX, as an example, who were like you were doing, setting up the sensors and stuff for the abductions, that they were doing it in another way? Is there any overlap, or do you guys work in conjunction? Are you dialoguing with each other?
Well, I personally am not, but I know of UAPX, and I know that the Center for UFO Studies, Mark Roediger, does interact with a number of those people, not necessarily Avi Loeb, but
Kevin Knuth and
and there's some other folks too, and there are a number of efforts to make these, call them what you will, boxes or instrument units or what have you. But I think that's a fruitful field. And believe me, I'm very, very, very annoyed that the AMP project didn't work out here as we expected it to. And it's almost forgotten now. It's a footnote to UFO history. But for some people who sort of keep it alive and keep sort of coming down on us a little bit as to what are you guys doing with that information? But it's embarrassing, and we didn't get the job done there.
Okay, so for those of you who aren't familiar with this, can we take out the shock paddles and put more life into the AMP project and talk about just overview what it was intended?
Well, the intention was to see whether or not there were actual events that abductees described as abductions, obviously, occurring in a person's life. Mostly we had to decide, where do these events occur most of the time? In an automobile, when they're just walking down the street, in a room in their house, in a bedroom, what have you. Because we had to put this instrument unit somewhere to situate it somewhere. It wasn't portable. And so we ended up putting these units mostly in the bedroom of a person, because they would say they would be taken in the night, and light would appear and the temperature might go down, all this kind of stuff. So we studied and worked very closely with Dr. Jacobs and Bud Hopkins at the time to find out what types of phenomena were reported by people during an abduction and what kind of instruments might be used to pick these up. We did not have a camera in the box for the privacy aspects you alluded to before, nor did we have a microphone per se. We had an instrument that picked up the absence or the presence of sound and what decibel level it was, but it couldn't make out words or anything like that. So you could say, oh yes, a loud sound just occurred and it lasted a third of a second. So we had a best guess as to what the instruments might pick up parts of an abduction, and we stuffed those into this box, and we plugged it in and hooked it up to a modem, and it just went away for 3 or 6 months until the particular abductees
So it's interesting because AI technology it's getting so. The first thought came in was scary, because it's like iChat.
Right.
I mean, it's insane. What is, I want to say coming, but it's already here, because
Right.
there's Stanford students that got called out for using them to write their term papers. The technology, and it is it's insane. I'm interested in applying that to some of the data that has been gathered. I wonder what would be derived from that, if anything.
Yeah, who knows there, Dean? it's been 20 years now since the AMP project came to an end, and the data we got could be much more easily harvested now with better equipment, smaller equipment, less expensive equipment, that the study could be redone. And this time, maybe it could even be something that you could have in a car, or it could use, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and all this kind of stuff. That was a little bit ahead of us. We still had to have our units hooked up by a cable to the phone lines in the house, so we could modem the information each day. But if anybody wants to do abduction research, that's a fantastic area to start. And it's easier to do than it was for us. We had to engage a lab to build this stuff and pay someone to design the box. A lot of this is really off.
Oh, I'm losing you. A lot of this was really...
Yeah, a lot of this equipment is off the shelf now. And I think the AMP project could be done much cheaper and much better, I think, than our pioneering effort to do it.
So what area of ufology, UAPology, I guess we can't say UAP, that sounds, no, that just sounds awful. It does not roll off the tongue at all. What area of it is your kind of the chewy inside for you, the caramel inside? What is the thing that really keeps you going? Did it start out with sightings and then become abductions, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. No one ever quite put it that way to me. I did morph into abductions for a while, into studying abductions. My wife and I did, and I worked closely with Richard Hall, and we interviewed quite a few people. But I'm not comfortable with abductions. I certainly think something's going on. And after the AMP project came to an end, I didn't see what my continued presence with abductees was going to do, short of reassuring them that the phenomenon probably wasn't going to kill them, or they'd emerge alive after each episode. I would still keep in touch with people and work closely with some of them, but gee, I sort of moved a little bit away from abductions, and I'm still just back to sightings, unfortunately. And in what time I have available, I do try to find week basis.
You do try to find. Sorry, we lost you again.
Yeah, I'm trying to find what sightings are occurring nowadays, because I think the only thing I can do at this point is to try to get a scientist or scientists interested in looking into the phenomenon. And how can I do that? The best way to do it is to show that person what kind of cases are occurring today and what's happening today. And working with MUFON to the best of my ability there. But because ultimately, if science looks at this phenomenon and gets paid for doing it, they're going to have to look at new cases. And new cases are something that MUFON has. They're not going to look at cases from the 50s as much as we like them, and in the 60s as much as we like them. They want new data. And I can tell somebody what kind of new sightings or what the sightings are today, and where you might want to go and who you might want to speak with. And that's, I think, what I could do.
Okay, I want to hit that, but it's interesting. I kind of went the other way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've always been fascinated in all aspects of the phenomenon, but I started out interested in the craft and wanting to get footage of the craft and see it. And I've seen some compelling footage for sure. And I kind of feel like after all these years, and even though everyone has a cell phone, I always like to make the joke when everyone says, when I get the old knee-jerk reaction, well, everyone's got a phone camera now, so they can be doing. I'm like, yeah, but look at their field of view. No one is going like this, and so everyone's looking down. And so it doesn't mean that, we're going to be getting more of this. But I feel like it's kind of so far almost capped out in certain things. I mean, I still do not have any shots that I've seen footage that are compelling for me that I feel intuitively like, all right, I'm seeing nuts and bolts. I'm seeing panels. I'm seeing this and that. Several witnesses have seen those. But there's no picture I can hold up and say, hey, here it is. Here's the panel. Here's a little smudge print. Here's,
right.
They left little gas or, a little oil from changing the oil under it. And so for me, it always is about humans, always about people, the human experience, the people experience. And so I kind of ended up find myself going back to the experiencers and looking at what they have. And I, again, anything that I'm pursuing, I think we have to look at, sleep paralysis and all those other prosaic possibilities. But, I always look for certain things. Like if someone says, no, my spouse next to me in bed saw the same thing. Well, two people don't have sleep paralysis. I don't know, unless there's a sleep paralysis dating website app that you swipe right for someone that that has paralysis while they sleep. Yeah, let's hook up. So it's really, for me, those things are still of interest. But again, it's how do we get that? I hate to use that term because it's like saying disclosure, but the smoking gun. And so it sounds like you've had your frustrations, across the board, but you're still very, optimistic, and you're getting, doing sightings research.
I am, and one of the reasons I haven't completely walked away from abductions, and yeah, I would like to find the smoky saucer, but nonetheless, but Bud Hopkins passed away a number of years ago. We used to have a fellow, Richard Haynes, who was another researcher. He's very elderly now and was retired from the field. Dave Jacobs is no longer active in the field. So we don't have these large profile, prominent abduction researchers that we had 20, 25 years ago, who were pretty transparent about the work they were doing. And I don't know of anybody I could really point to that is prominent. I know some abduction researchers, but who is prominent and is publishing a lot and is making lectures and is saying, here's what abductees are reporting now. So I couldn't really tell you, are there any new wrinkles in the UFO abduction field now that weren't there in the year 2000 or in 1990? And there's a big hole there. And when I read, every once in a while, someone will write an account of an abduction who apparently is an abduction researcher. I don't learn anything new. They're just telling me stuff that was extant back in 1980 about missing time, and they can disappear anytime, and that they're gone missing. They could go for a walk and have an experience. I know all that. But is anything new there? Dave Jacobs had some very, buy into it or not, as you will, he had a very explicit scenario he saw that was unfolding here on Earth with regard to the so-called aliens and abduction and abductees. Are those things still occurring to abductees? Dave's not around to tell us, but are people still being trained by these people who are half hybrids? Are they still being asked, how do I eat, or how do I act in public so I can fit in with human society? I have no idea, because no abduction researchers are writing about that kind of stuff.
That's a really good point. We don't have, someone who comes from Temple University, right, or Harvard, or is a, world-class artist like Bud Hopkins. David is still around, but he's, like you said, kind of inactive. Mm-hmm. But his research into hybrids, I think, was, I would say that would be a specialty. A good friend of mine is actually working on something right now that, gets involved in the hybrid program, which it's you can tell me anything. You can say that dragons exist, but I need to study you. I need to study the person who's telling me this in order for me to find, something that is relatable to truth. Because correct, unless, I can see it. Correct. And, that's a really good point. We don't have that kind of person out there. I mean, to a lesser or more or lesser degree, you've got Avi Loeb, who's kind of, the Galileo project, who's leading that. And, there's Harvard again, but yeah, we don't have that. I mean, there's a lot of people, not to insult people, that do a lot of research, like Yvonne Smith, Barbara Lamb, a whole bunch of other people. But as far as people who are out there on Oprah, say, or, writing those books that are covered by the big, we need that.
Yeah, they're not there. And you combine that with the very well-known reluctance of abductees to really go out and be interviewed by people and appear on publicly or on talk shows or podcasts now. Very
yeah.
few
And
of them
speaking
will
of
do
talk
that.
shows and radio,
Every once in a while, we would get a request from someone in the news media. Can you
KGR, I'm
direct
sorry,
me
going to
to?
interrupt for you for 1 second. KGR, we're going to be signing off. So thank you, KGRA listeners. Continue. We'll be going to YouTube as we continue here, but sign off there and thank you for listening. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just saying that every once in a while we would get a request from a news media person. Can you direct me to an abductee that I could interview or speak with? And I always cringe when that request comes up, because abductees or experiencers don't like to do that. They don't really like to give lectures at the MUFON symposium on their experiences. You get the rare one that will, but it's not very common. And so that even makes it more difficult.
Okay, that is really interesting, Rob, because I always analogy I use whenever I hear someone who's inclined to look at it in a humorous way, the tinfoil hat, slant. It's always very upsetting because I say, you're going to say, oh, really? It was a UFO? Was it triangular? Was it a flying saucer? And then they, did they probe you? Did they do this and that? And I always say, okay, what if I said, oh, you were abducted by another human? Was it a black van or was it a white van? Was there rope in the back? Did they do this and that, blah, blah, blah. And so when you have abductees that go and speak in front of people that have to do that, it's like saying, I'm someone, and Grant, I know there are a lot of experiences that have made their peace with that type of relationship that they're, having with these beings. But there still is that aspect of, I have to go and say, here's this traumatic thing where I was overtaken. I mean, that's the fact. And I got to speak about it. So how many people who are, who have been abducted by other humans and stuff want to get up on stage and speak about that and talk about that and do selfies with people,
And some of these cases, as you well know, are enormously personal. It's difficult to do it even in the privacy of a room with the abductees, to ask them some of the questions you have to ask in order to get a complete review of what occurred to them, and all kinds of questions, and some of them are very touchy. And then you're going to say to a person, oh, do you want to go up and talk at the MUFON symposium about this particular abduction? Hell no, they're not going to do that.
Yeah. I always feel like whenever I'm asking someone to do that, I worked on crime shows for 20 years, and it's like going and talking to the victims again. A lot of these people are not, victims. Some of these people have done TED Talks and stuff. You wouldn't know it.
Mm-hmm.
They're functioning and they're able to look at it like it's this relationship thing, especially like, Whitley Strieber will say that. But at the end of the day, it's still, going up and asking people to say, yeah, share this. And it's kind of like, well, why am I sharing this? Are we furthering the agenda along, or is it just kind of entertainment? So somewhere between the two, I think is where it at least should lie. So what are you excited about today in the UFO field? What gets you up? What gets you excited?
Well, the prospect that maybe things might open up a little bit with regard to the government sightings and the frustrations that are behind their research, and they're obviously have pushed into the tent here. At least the U.S. government has, and what's going to come out, after they turn the crank on the other end there. And so it's from that aspect, it's just pretty exciting. And MUFON has been working a little bit with some of the congressional committees. So it will be interesting to hear exactly how far some of that has gone. I don't know where it has gone. And so we have the possibility that maybe there'll be some more definitive conclusions about some of these sightings than we have received in the past. I'm not tremendously hopeful that that's going to happen, but hope springs eternal, I guess.
There's a question here I can see in the chat by Dr. Richard. He says, can't the ETs present themselves in the ways that they want us to perceive them, in ways that may be deceptive? Well, if they want to be deceptive, that kind of answers that question in and of itself, that they do want to be deceptive. So the question is, why? Why would they want to be deceptive?
Yeah, well, Dean, that's completely speculative, because you and I could do another 3 hours of podcasting and could just speculate on exactly why they might be doing what it is they seem to be doing, but we don't know, and I don't know why UFOs appear like they do, or why abductions occur. If we're dealing with, I always end up by saying, if we're dealing with an alien species or a non-human intelligence, we don't know how that intelligence is going to act. Their logic doesn't equal our logic. The things that we would say, well, they should land and make contact with the leaders of the countries, well, that may not be in their playbook. Another thing I sometimes have said is that Woody Allen once wrote about UFOs, and he said, for all I know, maybe they just like to hover. So, that's as good an answer as almost any.
Right.
My cat doesn't know why I do the things I do, and I don't know why she does the things she does. And the cat's in the house all the time.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting because looking at it from that other perspective, it is a challenge because, again, whenever I hear someone who is like an astrophysicist, and they say, well, the physics are the physics, it's the law, it's this or that, and it's like, no, they've changed a few times over the history, and Einstein himself has been rewritten, a couple times. And so I think it's, we don't know what we don't know. And for me, it's, I kind of, if I can step out and take my frustrations and compartmentalize it, I'm left with, well, I guess we're not supposed to know the ending, the third act, the climax of this yet. And, if we're researching bears, we tag them, we knock them out so they don't rip our heads off. We do the same type of, we take, stool samples, we take blood samples, etc. I'm not going to drop myself off in a den of bears and just assume everything's going to be fine. We're definitely a violent, species and still warring heavily. I think we'll have better luck with that when we get our, what together. And we can all agree on, certain things that are empirical, like not killing your fellow man and not doing things that want to make them kill you. So when we get to that, then we know, all right, well, there's no, danger here. But barring that, I'm not sure, as much as I really, would like to see them and have it be a formal thing. But it's kind of like, we can't handle their technology. We keep screwing up or weaponizing everything. So I see both sides. I don't know where you sit on that.
Yeah. Well, I basically, I do. I am still enthusiastic about the study of UFOs. I still like reading about what's occurring, both from a research point of view and from a sighting point of view. But truly, I'm not sure we're going to learn what the answer is for maybe hundreds of years. I don't have a hell of a lot of years left in my life here, but I'm not sure I'm going to see this resolved.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if the research that was done where they're able to regress that mouse, de-age them, you might get a chance. You might get a shot at it. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows?
I mean, just kind of looking forward, what are your hopes for the field? What do you hope to gain that you feel is realistic?
Well, I think it ultimately is realistic that we'll get more civilian researchers, engineers, scientists, in private industry and just in academia looking at the subject, maybe by virtue of reading some of these government reports where they keep reiterating that there are things they can't explain. And my hope is that we'll get, like I say, more civilian researchers involved in this, where we'll have more transparency as to what's going on. Because every time the government comes out with a report, parts of it are classified. We just get a little bit of the story. So it needs to be in the hands of the non-military establishment. And I think maybe at that point we could see some progress. Yeah.
It's interesting because so far it's been the most effective kind of covert operation, if you will. If you look at these visitors, the way that they've operated without, fully committed to revealing themselves,
Hmm.
for, decades, if not centuries, and beyond. It really is a pretty well comparatively, operation, but it definitely does seem like an operation that's being done.
It does, and to a certain extent, they know us better than we know ourselves. If you want to look at it like that, they seem to know how far they can go with regard to sightings and then pull back so that it doesn't quite tip the barrel over into getting the humans all stirred up, and they'll start a research project and they'll really figure out what's going on. But they just manage to keep on the periphery of our society and our culture. And like you say, they're not quite tipping their hands.
Yeah, and it's also interesting how people react. And I'm it's kind of like my last few questions here,
Mhm.
is when people do react to seeing this. Like, as an example, when I had when Dave Foley was a guest, he had seen his first UFO only months before, and with Jeremy Corbell, who hadn't seen a UAP, and they saw this thing, and neither of them, and Jeremy's a filmmaker, neither of them pulled out their phone and took the picture. They just looked at it and went, "Oh, wow. Yeah, that's one of those. That's a UFO." As it went by, that wasn't the exact dialogue, I'm sure, but they both agreed, "Oh shit, this is now we're seeing this thing," and it seemed to Dave like it put on a little bit of a show. It's like, we're here, and now we're going to go. And a lot of people claim that they look up and they're able to almost invoke it. It comes, it does its thing, does a little show, and Robbie Graham will say,
Yeah, the
lights are put
researcher
on a
Mike
show.
Swords has written a number of articles on the fact that, and one of them was even titled something like, "They know where you live," or "They know where you are."
Yeah.
That some of these sightings seem to be deliberately engineered for the people who are seeing it. And if you were just a few feet, literally 100 feet to one side or the other, to the right or the left, you wouldn't have seen this object do what it did. And they know where you live, I think is what Mike wrote on. But yeah, there does seem to be a personal interaction every once in a while between a witness and the UFO when it's just a sighting and not an abduction.
Well, the connection is, to me, just like endlessly fascinating. That, I mean, when I think, if I were to see a UFO, I've not seen a UFO, I think I would, be kind of elated and would be taking this in and, oh my God, and the whole thing. And I know that some people do have that reaction, but for Dave, he felt like it was this kind of this wash, this mild Xanax shower that calmed him. And it was just like, wow, I'm now in the moment watching this thing, and I'm just going to appreciate it and go, almost like the vehicle, whatever was in it, whatever energy was controlling him from, a couple miles away, however far it was.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I have heard similar descriptions of the aftermath of a UFO sighting from people.
Yeah. So what is the next phase for you? What are you working on next? What's exciting for you?
Well, some of it's pretty mundane. I end up helping out with the MUFON journal each month. So every month, literally like clockwork here, I have to do some of the copy editing for the articles coming in. So that takes up a lot of my time. And I'm now working a little bit with the National UFO Historical Records Center in Albuquerque with Dave Marler. And so that's an up and coming project that has great promise in finding a place for storing records and valuable sighting information, possibly down in Albuquerque. And so, yeah, I have a number of irons in the fire there from that regard that always keep me going, not to mention things that have nothing to do with ufology that seem to intrude on life. So what can I say?
So if you could speak to anyone about this who you think might have answers, who would it be, and what question would you ask? That's my final question.
Yeah, that's a good one. I don't know who that would be, to be honest with you, and let you down there on that. I can't speak.
Rob.
Yeah, I know. Damn it! It's like I wish I could speak with some people who are no longer here. In the sense of, I wish I could have met Alan Hynek and James McDonald, and Alan and Donald Kehoe. But I would have a lot of questions for them. But unfortunately, I don't see that there's nobody sitting on top of a mountain where I want to climb up to the mountain and ask them, what's the truth behind all this? That person just isn't there.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Well, Rob, thank you so much for coming on the show. I think this was your first time, right? On
Yes, it was.
Podcast UFO. Welcome on board.
It's great to be aboard.
Do you have anything coming as far as that you're publishing or anything coming up that you want to or recommend here before we sign off?
Oh, could you say that again, Dean? Once again, it dropped off here on my end.
Oh, is there anything that you're working on? Any type of appearances or anything that you've got coming up that you want to?
No, I can't say that there are. This is, we have our board meeting here in the next few days, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And my wife runs the Virginia MUFON, and I know she has a little conference coming up in the Virginia area here in March, I think it is. That she always asks me to say a few words there, so I probably will. So that's where I will be.
Nice. What's that called?
The Virginia MUFON just UFO meeting, monthly meeting.
Okay, great. All right. Well, Rob, thank you so much again for being on the show.
Thank you, Dean.
I want to mention that tomorrow's or next week's show is going to be a pre-recorded show. It's going to be a fascinating conversation with Martin and his guests, which is I'm going to butcher these names, so enjoy the butchering. Here it comes. Jensine Andrezen, and Massimo. That's an Italian name, so I'm good with that. Last name is Teodorani on their recently released book, Extraterrestrial Intelligence, Academic and Societal Implications. Sounds really interesting. This is Dean Aliotto signing off. I do want to let you guys know that with the encouragement of Martin and several of you guys out there, something that I've been thinking about doing for a very long time, I'm finally doing, which I am getting ready to do. Yes, a podcast. So it'll be a unique take on this with some levity and some humor, but we will be bringing not just experts and stuff, but also UFO folks and the such. So thank you again for everyone's support, and don't forget that Patreon is a great way to say you appreciate Martin's show. So Martin, be safe on the road, and we will see you next week, guys.